can hear in the background, my clock has just struck 10 o'clock. So you're all very welcome, and thank you indeed for joining us this morning. My name is Paul Sloven, Chair of Chambers Wales, and it's my privilege to chair this event this morning on behalf of our esteemed and valued partner, BT. Star-studded cast, but let me just set the scene if I may. It's a pleasure to work with people like BT when you look at the level of commitment that they have to making sure that from a Wales perspective, we develop a thriving and inclusive economy based on the new way of working. And we all have to accept that our way of working has changed quite profoundly over the last 18 months. And it's the pace at which BT are rising to that challenge and producing technology and people-led solutions to enable us to continue to work in this very different pattern. So that's broadly the subjects we're going to be covering this morning. Just a couple of housekeeping things, if I may, please. The real value of this session, of course, is the questions that you submit to us. So please feel free to use the Q&A panel, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen, to submit any questions you wish. And just for everybody's benefit, we will try to get to as many of those questions as we can, and we've had some pre-submitted questions. Thank you to those people who did that. But if there are questions that we don't have time to get to, you will for sure hear from us separately after the event. So please put as many questions in as you can. The event is being recorded, and that's primarily for BT's purposes only, and we will stick to the 1 hour. Now, the agenda you can see on your screen, that's me doing the introduction piece at the start. I will shortly hand over to Sam Toombs. Sam runs the corporate and public sector business for Wales and the Southwest. She's also the first chair of the board for both geographies across BT Group. We're then moving to Dr. Nicola Millard. Now, I don't normally read people's introductions, but let me just share this with you because I just find this incredibly energetic. Nick Millard injects a positive, people-centered approach to innovation and future strategy. Half social scientist, half technologist, all academic. She uses techniques from disciplines such as design thinking, psychology, anthropology, computing, and business consulting to generate data, provocations, and stories which can engage and create conversations for the boardroom. Well, I mean, there's a description in one, and we really look forward to Nicola's presentation, which is, by far the lion's share of this. And then Sue Glue will pick up with us as program director for BT. And at that point, once Sue's done, we will have the opportunity for questions and answers. So that's my bit done. Thank you for that. Thank you again for joining. You're all very welcome. And I'm just going to ask Sam to pick up the thread from here. Sam.
Hi everyone. How can I beat Paul and Nicola's introduction? I have no idea. So I'm just going to tell you that I'm a proper Welsh girl, originally from Massicummer, now living in Aberafan, and it's an absolute privilege and my passion and purpose and my team's passion and purpose to help give back to Wales as much as we possibly can. So what do we want to do? We want to build a thriving Wales and lead a digital innovation nation and create better places, cities, villages, towns, and ultimately the nation as a whole. And what we're trying to do is create better experiences for people and for the citizens of Wales, create local jobs for local people, and ultimately improve the economy and bounce back from COVID. And Nicola's going to talk a bit more about COVID and how that shaped the place of work shortly. So next slide, please. So our ambition is most definitely to create a digital fabric and do everything that it says here on the top left of the page. And the way we do that is through inclusive growth. So we're not just a tech provider, we are genuinely trying to improve outcomes for the nation and places within that at multiple levels. As Paul said, I sit in the BT Enterprise division, and just a few facts and a snapshot about that really. So we are the biggest network comms provider in the UK. We have over 1.2 million customers, and that's across SMEs, micro businesses, sole traders, up to as big corporates and big public sector brands that you're very familiar with. We underpin essential public services here in Wales, so that's all of the NHS, schools, public sector, Welsh Government through our primary contract here with Welsh Government called PSBA. And we are a big investor in 5G, and we're using our mobile network to create better outcomes for citizens. And what we want to do is have more proof of concepts here, born and bred in Wales, that we can use as best practice and roll out across the rest of the UK and indeed globally if we can. And indeed, we're doing some of those places in Blaenau Gwent at the moment. So next slide, please. So these are the 3 pillars to our approach in Wales: inclusive growth, sustainability, and health and well-being. And as we bounce back from COVID, we want to help innovate and drive better outcomes with you. So now I'm going to hand over to Dr. Nicola Millard with that amazing introduction, and she's going to help you understand a bit more about the forces shaping the future of the workplace.
Thank you very much, Sam. So yes, hello, my name's Nicola. I did used to be BT's futurologist, and I'm kind of glad I don't have that job title now, because yeah, it's a weird job title for a start, and always provokes the same question if you're at a party, frankly, which is do you have a crystal ball? And the answer to that is yes, I do. Someone very kindly gave me one, and it really doesn't work. So although my job title has got a lot more boring recently, I'm Principal Innovation Partner, my job isn't boring. Looking at tea leaves and crystal balls would be boring. Definitely not boring, my job. So I'm part of BT's innovation team. I'm normally based at Adastral Park, which for those of you who know BT is our main research and innovation centre just outside Ipswich. I am, of course, today not there. I am in my kitchen broadcasting live from Ipswich this morning. So yeah, I have actually been into Adastral a couple of times over the past month or so, and it has been a tiny bit weird, hasn't it? So going to the office is something we're having to get used to again. And I guess I've been looking at the future, well, many years now. Actually, I think we started the project on the future of work about 11 years ago. And of course, a lot of the stuff I was talking about pre-pandemic has just been hyper accelerated by the pandemic. So today I am going to give you a little bit of, we're going to go on a journey together. We're going to go on a journey from A to Z. We're going from automation to Zedonks. Hopefully all will become apparent as we go along. We could nudge on one slide. Just to put this into context, so I am part of an innovation ecosystem, I guess. Adastral's the hub of it, but a lot of the stuff you're going to see today, we do with a lot of our ecosystem partners in terms of innovation. So you're going to see some flavours of work from the likes of Massachusetts Institute of Technology, who we have a strategic partnership with, the likes of Cambridge University, again, a strategic partner, Lancaster, London Business School, London School of Economics. You get the picture, basically. We don't do this on our own. And I always say my job is to take a lot of this stuff, and part of my job is speed dating. So speed dating with people like yourselves to try and look at how do we harness all of these big brains and exciting technologies, but then apply it to challenges that you're having on a daily basis. And actually, the future of work is a brilliant one to look at for me anyway, because I am a slightly unusual part of the innovation team in that I am not a technologist, I am a psychologist. And this is fascinating from a psychological perspective. And I keep saying if there ever was a perfect time for a pandemic, this was probably it, because technologically, we've got the holy trinity of connectivity, cloud and collaboration tools that have really kept us going. If we, even 5 years ago, I think we would have struggled from a technology basis. But yeah, it's been maybe 3 years that we've had very effective cloud connectivity and collaboration tools. And yet the ways that we worked were starting to change, but they hadn't been hyper accelerated. And it's kind of taken a pandemic to do that. So the focus of my work really now is what's next. So what have we learned from the pandemic? What are the next challenges that we need to look at? And what does seem to be emerging in terms of the trends shaping this future world of work? So if we could nudge on one slide. I think the one thing I always do is look to the past, because I think any good futurist does. And actually, there are some incredible futurists in the past, notably Arthur C. Clarke, who, of course, predicted satellite technology. But it's quite interesting. I found this quote that it was an interview with the BBC he was giving, which was quite fascinating, because he said people will work from Tahiti or Bali, although oddly enough, I've chosen Ipswich because, you know, they're comparable, as well as from London. Actually, place becomes less relevant. And I thought it was also interesting that he said, well, we'd only travel for pleasure rather than for business. Well, it's just over 50 years since he made that statement. And there are elements of that are starting to come true. And I think particularly with a climate crisis looming large, I think we have to really carefully think about business travel, especially. So are we going to be living and working in Tahiti, Bali or Ipswich rather than necessarily commuting into large urban centres? That's a very big question. And if we could nudge on one slide, I think it's a question that is certainly perplexing a lot of business leaders at the moment. And I think it's fascinating from my perspective, just looking at the announcements that are coming out gradually from companies announcing, you know, oh yes, we're going to be all back in the office. Certainly very early on, financial services, the likes of Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan's were going, no, we want everyone back in the office because we think the office is a valuable tool, and it is, and more on that later. So, I mean, my first hypothesis was, well, it's going to be banking and financial services that are going to move first. They're all going to be back in the office. And then, of course, we get Lloyds, Barclays and Nationwide announcing entirely the opposite. You can work anywhere. So it's not sector specific, this. And again, you could even look at tech sector. For every Netflix saying, I want people back in the office, we've got a Facebook going, well, actually, Mark Zuckerberg has said, I'm not going to be in the office, so you don't have to be either. So we're not seeing any clarity in terms of sector strategies, even sectors that you would think, oh, well, they're not going to allow home working. Well, because they can't. The primary example I'm talking about here is construction. Skanska, interestingly enough, announced that they were going to do flexible working. Now, of course, you can't build a house from home unless it's your house, but you can offer flexible hours. And I think we're not just talking about place flexibility here, we're also potentially talking about time flexibility. So there's nothing clear coming out in terms of sector. Other hypotheses I had, was it something to do with culture and country and policy coming out of those cultures and countries? Well, you can certainly see China, which was a very office-centric culture prior to the pandemic, has oddly enough become a very office-centric culture as the pandemic has emerged as well, because it's ingrained in the ways that they work. They go to an office, they work very long hours as well. Obviously, Boris and Rishi Sunak have sort of said that, yeah, we definitely want English people back in the office. We want them back in urban centres. But that's actually countered by, I loved reading the Irish policy that came out that was very much around rural regeneration and had the most Irish policy in it, full stop, which was let's regenerate the network of local pubs as co-working spaces. I like to call these poffices. I'm not sure entirely how productive I'd be in there, but I think that's a brilliant idea around using communities to actually generate a community feeling outside those urban centres, so that we encourage more levelling up, oddly enough. And then, of course, we've got Iceland doing some weird stuff with 4-day weeks, and they've just done a very convincing experiment around 4-day weeks, showing that actually people can become very productive. So watch this space, frankly. Although 70% of companies are now sort of announcing some kind of hybrid policy, who knows? And that's why this is a fascinating area. If we nudge on one. So, I mean, lots of people are talking about hybrid. I'm an academic, so instantly I go, well, what do you mean? Because there's lots of talk about flexible working and smart working and all sorts of other flavors, digital working. And hybrid has kind of come along and gone, yeah, everyone's going to go hybrid. What is hybrid? That's a very big question, because I mean, the analogy I tend to use is the Zedonk, which is my favorite hybrid. As you can see, it's a rather cute looking donkey with zebra socks, basically. But I can tell you that creature does not spend its entire week going, well, am I a zebra today or am I a donkey? And I use the same argument in terms of the conversations I've been having with hybrid, because this isn't about the number of days you're in an office. It's not 3 days in an office and 2 days at home. That is not hybrid working. That is a flavour of flexible working. And certainly if it's contracted flexible working, you have to be in on a Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday. I call that inflexible flexible working. So it's not that hybrid working. It is a different breed, just as the Zedonk is. Now, pure hybrids, they've been discussed for quite a long time. This is quite a difficult model, but what it does is untie us from time and place. So in other words, where we work and when we work becomes less relevant. Actually, the thing that becomes more relevant is the work. And to be honest, that's what we should be focusing in on. How do we make work work? And again, as I said, we've got an opportunity to reinvent and take away some of the toxic practices. And as Linda Bratton at London Business School says, what we shouldn't be doing is taking the toxic elements of work prior to the pandemic and making that hybrid. We actually want to take the best parts of work and make that into the hybrid, and also absolutely think about how do we make this better for productivity, people, and the planet as well. So those are all big questions. Let's delve in a little bit more detail to the hybrid. If we could nudge on one, please. Now, interestingly enough, when you start to delve into a lot of these models, including things like productivity, the 9 to 5, the Monday to Friday, a lot of this is rooted in the Industrial Revolution, frankly. It's all about factory workers. That's why we consolidated and centralized an awful lot. Economies of scale. Even the 9 to 5 week, the Monday to Friday week didn't exist prior to the Industrial Revolution. In fact, people tended to work a 6-day week. The 5-day week came about, I am told, because of football, because most people didn't want to come in on a Saturday because they wanted to play football. So they gave people a Saturday off, and oddly enough, they found out that people were more productive, oddly enough. So we are, I think, in another revolution here, and it had started prior to the pandemic, and it is driven by all of the digital technologies that we use. But we've got to think more about how we change our cultures, how we change our leadership styles, how do we change work itself in order to make a lot of this work? And that's really difficult. And certainly if we nudge on one, we can start to see, as we start to sort of ask, I guess, strategic decision makers, what do you want to get out of this? We tend to get answers, and this was a survey we did back in October with business leaders, just saying, what do you want to get out of a future world of work? Most of them had digital workplace initiatives in place, including BT. You're going to hear a little bit more about that in a minute. But nearly every customer I work with had already been thinking about this prior to the pandemic. And my frustration was it tended to be all about, let's put the technologies in and then everything else will be sorted out. But actually, we do need to go into this with an objective in mind. And that objective does need to be about how do we improve productivity? Actually, how do we measure productivity is a big one as well in the digital workplace. Because again, we don't work in factories. We don't produce widgets. We are knowledge workers. How do you measure a knowledge worker when inputs and outputs are very uncertain? So we are using, again, the big brains in the likes of Cambridge and MIT to say, what measures do we need to think about in a digital workplace? Then, of course, we want to improve the customer experience. That's imperative. But in order to do that, we also need to improve the employee experience because the two go together. So, I mean, those are the top two strategies, and we must keep those in mind when we're actually, creating a new world of work. If we could nudge on one. The devil, of course, is in the detail, and delving into hybrid models, ones that have done in the past, and to be honest, things we've experienced in the past, we know that there are quite a lot of horrible hybrids that could rear their ugly heads. I call them hybrid headaches as well, but there are some obvious ones. One I experienced it prior to the pandemic, but I had probably the worst meeting I have ever had last week, and it was a hybrid meeting. Those meetings where half the people are in the room? Well, actually, in this case, only about a third of the people are in the room. 2/3 were actually dialing in digitally. The problem often is that out of sight means out of mind. This meeting, I wish I'd recorded it because it was like a comedy sketch. So there were 6 people in the room, about 20 people online. The person in the room who was chairing the meeting to the room, and therefore had her back to the camera. So we could occasionally see her chin or a nose. And then she started writing on a whiteboard that we couldn't see, because we were online, and we also couldn't hear the room. So what actually happened was fascinating. Bear in mind, I'm a psychologist. So a chat session started to emerge amongst the online participants. And we started to have our own conversation, which was entirely working in parallel in a different universe to the universe in the room, who were having their own little conversation. And then gradually, as the conversation died off, people started to disengage and do their email. Now, that is a classic hybrid, a horrible hybrid, and that is all to do with proximity bias. Out of sight is out of mind. Now, that's just the first example. Frankly, we also need to think about leadership here as well. We have got some fairly compelling stats prior to the pandemic that people that felt that if they weren't seen to be in an office, they weren't going to get promoted, they weren't going to get a good appraisal. So we need to think about that. And I think the other thing we need to think about in terms of hybrid is making all work visible, not just the work that goes on in the four walls of the building. Let's make it all visible. And to do that, you need a much more asynchronous written culture, which is quite alien. I'm going to talk about meetings in a minute, but meetings are definitely parts of the problem often with what we're doing. Then, of course, there's time factors. Firstly, office-based people work in a slightly different way to remote people. We've got, the classic Dolly Parton 9 to 5 in the office. We tend to work in a block of time, whereas as we've learned during the pandemic, remote work is a little bit more like time confetti. So we usually start earlier, we finish later, we work longer, but we do other stuff. We juggle other stuff, whether it's walking the dog or picking up the kids. We've effectively got organizations that are working out of sync, which is why hybrids require a lot of synchronization. Then we have the classic office problem. We call it the Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday problem, in that if you give people a free rein over what days they come into the office, they tend to come in on a Tuesday, a Wednesday and a Thursday, and that abbreviates to something rude. I won't go there, but the problem then is, of course, you've got expensive real estate with tumbleweed in on a Monday and Friday, and then no one can book a room or a desk or anything on a Tuesday, a Wednesday and a Thursday. So how do we iron out that demand and coordinate it a lot better? And then there's tons of stuff around leadership. I haven't got that long, but how does leadership by walking around work when you can't walk around? That's a big dilemma. And actually what we found is, the pandemic's put a big focus on leadership. But secondly, leaders need to be very intentional in what they're doing. And that means it's quite scheduled. There's very little spontaneity. But I think leaders need to be good at telling stories. They need to be good at articulating purpose. And I think one of the key skills that we're seeing emerge, not just for leaders, but I think for everyone, is the ability to build networks, to connect with each other. And again, a lot of that has to be intentional when you're dealing with a workplace that doesn't necessarily mean that you see people on a regular basis. I think the big thing is that we don't have all of the answers here. I think there are going to be a lot of horrible hybrids emerging in the next 18 months. The thing is to not just go, oh, this isn't working, let's go back to the old ways of doing things. I think it's all about experimentation and learning from mistakes and actually making things a lot better. If we nudge on one. So we've got a lot of things we need to think about in terms of the hybrid workplace. We also need to think about the fact that actually during the pandemic, the one thing that really has emerged is the fact that the digital workplace, which is the default in a hybrid actually, so this is the default common ground, it is an inclusive common ground. And when we're talking about things like diversity and inclusion, it's been actually it's been a tough time, but it's been a very good time in terms of making sure that voices that weren't being heard have been heard. Now, in particular, I have two friends who are in wheelchairs. Now, they've told me, because they knew I was talking about this stuff, they've said that they've had a brilliant 18 months because they've been able to go to every meeting, every conference and participate fully. Now, of course, they can physically go to meetings and they say they do want to as well. They don't want to be stuck at home all the time. But opening up to hybrid means that they can still participate even if they cannot get there. So, and I think also we're getting this vibe, and we were getting this prior to the pandemic, that the one thing that employees really value is flexibility and autonomy. And I think those are the things that are causing what is, I call it the COVID-exodus, the mass resignation, I think is what the mainstream press are calling it at the moment, in that if people who have jobs that they're finding are very inflexible, they're actually quitting them and going somewhere else. So again, we need to think about this inclusivity piece as we move into this future of hybrid. Now, John, one, please. the office does play a huge part. There was lots of debates prior to the pandemic. Is the office dead? And I think it's become very apparent during the pandemic that it most definitely is not, because it's often, well, the one thing that we've missed is people, not necessarily the building, but we've missed the people in the office. And I think it just underlined the fact that the role of the office has been changing for a while. And it's not necessarily a place that we go to do heads down concentrated work, because frankly, a lot of offices are very distracting. It is absolutely a place, though, that we go to socialise about work. So to communicate, to collaborate, to build community. That's actually quite hard to do in a remote situation. But that's a very different office to the offices that were very much optimised for, you know, effectively bums on seats. So how many people can we cram into this little space? We're having to think a lot more about what the function of the office is. And I think the big question in hybrid is, what is the office for? How do we absolutely define that? Now, of course, home working hasn't worked for absolutely everybody. We've got about a 70-30% split. 70% of people have said, yeah, it really has worked for me. 30% have said, no, I can't work from home. Now, that 30% tends to skew younger, tends to skew to people that are at the beginning of their careers. Mainly for a couple of reasons. Younger employees typically often are in shared housing, so don't necessarily have the study, the door that they can close away from everybody else. And also they don't have the networks that we who've been with organisations for a very long time have, that have developed over years. So it's still a really valuable space for them. But of course, the home isn't going to go away either. That's going to be part of the choice. And I mentioned earlier that the POFIS, the co-working space, or I used to call it the COFIS, because frankly, I run on coffee. So I think that's an interesting space as well. Again, with the climate crisis in mind, can we start to create these 15-minute cities? I think the French are calling it la vie de couleur. So yeah, how do we create these 15-minute cities which are walkable and cyclable? So that kind of thing, I think we need to really think about. We could nudge on one, please. I think that the dynamics that have shifted during the pandemic have been really, really interesting. So Microsoft in particular, and we've been taking data from Microsoft and our own network and certainly other studies as well, just to look at how collaboration has shifted during the pandemic. So firstly, we've seen a number of things. Within teams, the links have got a lot stronger. So what we've seen within teams is a lot more communication, a lot more collaboration, and a lot more coordination. And we can see that from the number of emails and chats, and in particular, meetings. Woo! Now, I always say I get up in the morning with an impending sense of Zoom now, because particularly in the virtual workplace, what we've tended to do is to schedule back-to-back meetings, 30 to 60-minute chunks of time back-to-back. Now, I would question that's not a productive way of working. Actually, Microsoft have shown the effects of that on the brain, and effectively the brain dies after about half a day of doing back-to-back meetings. It's what we've tended to do is to take this analog concept of the meeting and say, okay, let's just shift this into the digital workplace. And because it's frictionless when you are all fully remote, it is very tempting to just schedule back to back. The interesting thing is in a hybrid, and I'm seeing it in my diary, and I'm sure you are all as well, the problem often comes when you're having to travel. So I'm having this dilemma at the moment that if I am actually in an office or traveling somewhere, I can't fit in as many meetings. Now that could be a good thing. I've got friction. I can actually go to the toilets and have a cup of coffee and maybe have a conversation with somebody. So I think what we need to think about is the role of meetings as well as the role of the office, and really sort of figure out, should this be a meeting or could this be done more asynchronously? Now that's within direct teams. When we look outside teams, our network has got a lot weaker, and this is tied into a lot of the conversations around things like serendipity. Now, I get quite annoyed with people that say you can only do serendipity in an office, because I actually firmly believe that you can do serendipity digitally. You just have to work harder. It's not quite as spontaneous. How do we engineer that though? And there are lots of tools out there. There's one very terrifying one I was looking at that was basically like Tinder for the workplace. So if it tried to match you with people with very similar interests, and then if you swiped right, suggested that you went for a virtual coffee with them, which I found slightly terrifying, but then I'm an introvert, so I would. Yeah, I'm not sure that's the answer really, but that's why I keep saying networking is a key skill that we probably all need to acquire better. If we shift on one, I think that obviously the conversation on the future of work has tended to dominate on the high skill office-based workers. I think actually a lot of the innovation can be taken beyond the office as well to those critical frontline workers. I don't have time to go through all of these today, but we've got lots of initiatives ranging from our immersive classroom, which we've been trialing up in Scotland. Actually, one of the most interesting ones is our 5G ambulance, which we've been trialing in the West Midlands. You can see the guy there with an augmented reality headset on and a haptic glove, transmitting using 5G, high definition video and touch, plus all of the instrumentation back to a remote medic who can then supervise the paramedic through procedures that they wouldn't be able to do if they were unsupervised. So that what we're really trying to do is extend the boundaries of collaboration out here, right to the front line. We've got our guy in the orange is a Belfast Harbour crane inspector, again, augmented reality headset, because he's climbing cranes, he can't have handheld devices. We've got a checklist in front of his eyes, he can bring in remote experts, and we're linking that to drone technology as well. Even jobs that we might think can only be done from the front line, things like hairdressing. I don't know if you saw the recent EE advert where we shaved Tom Ellis remotely using a robot arm. Yeah, that wasn't faked. So could we have remote hairdressers? The guy in the blue is actually a miner. He's in China. This isn't one that we are doing, but it's absolutely fascinating. Again, using 5G to drive mining equipment, potentially mining from home. And then, of course, we can start to add an extra dimension as well. So quite timely, given the ABBA announcement of avatars, we're actually looking at holograms as well, something called volumetric video. Actually, the advantage of it's not quite as high definition as the avatar type stuff, but the advantage is that you don't have to wear spandex and dots on your face in order to do it, although that is a choice to come into the office, I suppose, but we're using multiple cameras to generate holographic images of people. So watch this space on that one. It's a bit clunky at the moment, but then so was video about 15 years ago. My final slide, because I am running out of time now, but I do want to mention this because I do think it's really, really important, particularly with hybrid working, is a trend that I call the death of Dolly, which is, of course, Dolly Parton, who isn't dead, by the way. I am a massive Dolly fan, but the 9 to 5, the Monday to Friday, I think is all up for grabs. And largely, the problem is boundaries. 9 to 5, going into an office gives us boundaries. We know when we're working, we know when we're not working. And I think the issue that we've unearthed during the pandemic is some of us feel that we are living at work. We don't know where the off switch is. And as Kevin Kelly in Wired said once, the problem of the future is not connection, it's disconnection. And this is where we've been working with both Cambridge University, and the stuff here you can see is with Lancaster University, looking at this problem of switching off. And we've been focusing in on the technology, techno stress, we've been calling it. The fact that actually, you know, we're trying to process too much information. We're having to struggle with a lot of technologies, particularly in the business world, that aren't as intuitive as they should be. There is this pressure to be always on. I call it beware the M&Ms, so meetings, managers and messaging. All of those things may encourage us to work 24 hours a day. And yet, as Iceland has just proved, working less can be far more productive sometimes. And then, of course, I think people have been anxious about losing their job, and therefore they are almost trying to force, particularly when they're not seen to be in an office, they're trying to demonstrate that they're working very, very hard. And again, that can add to stress, overload, and eventually burnout. So I think well-being has become very much part of the spotlight for the hybrid. So I am going to stop there. I think hybrid is a really interesting way of working. I think we have a big opportunity at the moment to reinvent work completely, but we do need to think very carefully. And as I said, I think the one thing I would leave you with is make sure that you have an experimental mindset on all of this, because it's not all going to work. So I'm going to shut up now, and I am going to pass over to Sue, who is going to give you a very much more practical view from the ground of what we as BT are doing as a response to the pandemic. Sue, over to you.
Thanks, Nicola. Good morning, everyone. Yes, and thank you for having the opportunity to talk to you today. So yeah, I, on behalf of BT, am leading what we call our Better Workplace programme. We named this programme about 3 years ago. It's been a long time coming, and I feel a bit sad that we were so unambitious in its title, because actually we are delivering amazing workspaces, and we should have been a bit bolder. However, we are where we are. If you want to just move me on to the next slide, please. But the vision that we painted when we started the programme, which is a long time ago now, is still really relevant, and I'm very pleased that we have, by complete luck, stood the test of time. When I started this programme, I had a risk register with 1 million things on it. What I didn't have on it was a global pandemic that would send everybody home in the middle of us building a load of physical environments for them to work in. So it's been the curveball that I could never have predicted. But really happily, all the things that we set out to do are really sort of holding their own, as I've said. So just to share with you our vision, this is very much internal. We haven't shared this publicly, but this is really what we set out to do. And our HRD, Alison, was really kind of involved in this from a people perspective. And I really like the first bit, which is about it should feel like home. Because, you know, actually now getting people out of their homes and their slippers and their comfort into, you know, having commuted and gone to an office is going to have to feel good when you get there. And we're really blessed that we are creating spaces that just feel wonderful when you walk into them. But really identifiably BT, the picture that you can see there on the right is still CGI, but that is being built today as we speak, actually, in Bristol. Really importantly around the inclusive spaces, as Nicola said. In fact, today in Wanborough, in our new head office, which isn't open yet, but we have 60 odd guests here today who are here from a kind of inclusivity perspective from all of the different kind of people networks. And that's been a really important part of the design and build, and really focused on well-being. So we've all sorts of wonderful spaces in the building which are wellbeing related. Even the room I'm in now, I've just been trying to play with the lighting. All the rooms are lighting adjustable. You know, we've got fantastic wellbeing spaces dedicated to, you know, whatever it might be, yoga, Pilates. We've got multi-faith rooms. We've got parenting rooms. We've got quiet spaces. We've got heat control spaces for those of us who are of a certain age who need cooler rooms. So we're really dedicated to that in the design, which I think, you know, looking at where we are now is going to be critical for colleagues to return to the workplace. Obviously, it needs to showcase our digital capabilities, and I'll talk more about that briefly in a second. And then a really big thing about the community, the reason to come together. And our kind of strapline is bringing people together to transform the way we work. And that's the key for us, is that when you come in, you know, it's different. It's not come in, head down, carry on, but it is a space to collaborate. If you just nudge me on, please. I won't read all of this out, but I'll just pick out a couple of points. So obviously, the programme itself is about really bringing together we had people in 900 and odd buildings in 400 and odd locations across the UK. So we're bringing them together into fewer locations and fewer buildings so that we can create great buildings and invest in them, the physical space and the technology in those spaces as well. But the big thing for me is co-locating with purpose, going into an office space where there's nobody that you work with. Why would you go in? If you go in knowing that there's a team in there and you've got something planned for that day as a team where being together physically is better, then that's what we're creating spaces to do that. I talked to one of my team yesterday who popped into our Bristol office and said, I didn't know who was going to be around, but actually there were 10 or so people. And we sat and had a coffee and we solved 6 things in half an hour that would have been 6 half-hour meetings in Teams in my diary. And it was really good fun doing it. And those are the little moments that I think we just need to be really kind of talking about those anecdotally, about this is what it's worth coming in. And to Nicola's point about flexibility, just come in for half the time, come in for the time that you need to be in there to collaborate. And as BT, we're having a kind of a, you know, we're moving from the dolly 9-to-5 culture, I think, for the roles that are relevant into more smart working, coming when you need to come in, when you need to collaborate. The really big thing here, and Nicola referred to it as well, is leadership. So for us, you know, it's going to be important that leaders are present, and it's not just lip service and we say come back to the workplace but I'm going to stay at home. Being physically present and being there to set that vision and tell those stories and be in the room with colleagues, I think will be important. So we've spent a lot of our time looking at the leadership footprint and where leaders need to be in the UK to best support the offices. If you nudge me on again. This is just, I'm not a digital person, by the way. I'm very much HR and change and transformation. But so this is a very potted version of our digital ambition, but it's just to give you an overview, really. But obviously, digital runs through our new buildings. And really importantly, around the hybrid is one of our ambitions was your experience. If you're in a room in one of our Better Workplace buildings, or whether you're at home, it should be the same, level playing field, good experience. And I think the human behaviour around that's really key, because I'm having to relearn how to chair meetings when half the people are in and half aren't, and try not to put my back to the camera and so on. So there is something about us getting used to how we work, but the technology in our buildings does make it super easy, as opposed to I can't find a cable and I can't plug in and the Wi-Fi is crap and all of those things. So our connectivity solution is kind of, you know, leading edge and is brilliant. And then all the tools that we have in the buildings are really helping people. But equally, we have some rooms with no tech, and I think that's important. There are lots of spaces to go and sit, comfy chair, dim the lamps, do some work, have some quiet time. But if you want high tech, then that's there in all of our buildings. And on to the next slide, please. Which is my last slide. I am deliberately going quickly just to make up a bit of time. So a lot of people have said to me, and right at the beginning particularly, surely you're going to stop the Better Workplace programme, surely the office is dead. And, you know, to Nicola's point, that has been a conversation, hasn't it? A big conversation in the world and in the UK. And I'm really pleased to say that we don't believe it is. And actually, we think the office will always be an important part of the way we work in BT. It's not the be all and end all, but it will be an important part. So, but we have made adjustments. We have, for example, realised, and I'm really delighted with this, that flexibility can work and that we can trust colleagues to be really productive working from home. And we do need to give colleagues choice. And if we want to be a big player in the recruitment market, we have to be a flexible employer that gives choice about where and how we work. I think we're very fortunate that we're ahead with the programme, because we have got now brilliant spaces to bring people back into, but we have adjusted. So we've adjusted, for example, you know, the old classic desk agility ratio, how many desks you need per person. Well, obviously that's changed because people are going to come in, we believe, for fewer days of the week and for fewer times even within a day. And we have, at a commercial level, we have acquired less space. So the picture that you can see there, which is our Manchester New Bailey building, we have redesigned it, gone back out around the planning and the architecture process, and we are building a smaller building in Manchester to reflect the fact that we need more flexibility and that we won't expect people to be coming in the same way that they were pre-pandemic. So I love the fact that we've embraced that, and we recognise that, and it will help us commercially potentially to have less space in the future. But we've also made changes to the designs internally, so less desks, more flexible space, more collaboration space, you know, lots of funky sofas and breakout spaces, and, you know, movable screens and movable furniture and dividing walls that move and so on. So really made us think about how we design our workplaces so that when people come in to collaborate, they can always find the space to do it, and find spaces that they find motivating and you know, kind of make them want to come in. And just to finish, we had our board in our Snow Hill Birmingham building a couple of weeks ago, which is our first big building that we've opened. And one of them said to me this week, when you've been talking to us about spaces that transform the way we work, honestly, I didn't quite really see how that would work. Isn't it just an office? But having been in there and seen the different environments and the different spaces we can use and how they make you work in a different way, I get it. And our role as leaders will be to help to bring that to life for people, to say, go in and try these different spaces and work in different ways, because it really will make a difference to your day. And that, I think, is the bit that we have to really focus on and maximise in order that we bring the office, you know, back to life for people. And I'll stop and happy to take any questions. And I think I will now hand back to Paul. So thank you.
Thank you. So Sam and Nicola, been doing this for 18, 19 months now, and I think that's probably one of the most energetic pictures I've ever seen in my life, coming from all of you, and in particular Nicola. I assume, Nicola, you're still with us? You are.
I am. I think my video has gone a bit awry, but I can still hear you, even if you can't see me.
No, we can't see you at the moment, but that's fine, as long as you're there. I also know that our Director for Wales, Nick Speed, is sitting in the background. So Nick, please feel free to come in with any responses. So the four areas that I'd really like to pick up are all the P's, to use some of Nicola's analogies about keeping all the letters the same, and they're about place, people, productivity, and process. You've talked a lot about, and particularly Sue, in your last piece, you talked about what BT is doing, but obviously BT is a very significantly scaled company. And we face an economy here in Wales, which is predominantly made up of smaller organisations. So what do we see the translation of, the lessons that BT have learned, the work that you're implementing right now? What can we ask, or what can we hope for in respect of, if I'm running a small business in remote Wales, how does this impact me from a place perspective? I'll put that to Sue.
Thanks, Paul. So just let me clarify so I understand so I can best answer you. So you mean from a physical perspective in terms of bringing people back into the workplace, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you've talked a lot about the benefits of BT and what you've done within BT, and you obviously have the resources to do that. But obviously smaller companies don't necessarily have either the bandwidth, the skills, or the investment to be able to create some of the stuff that you've done in BT. What's the collective view in respect of how that translates into a smaller company? What are the best practices that they could look at?
I guess on one of the slides I had kind of 5 little sections, and I think it's about I would always start with the leadership. So the leadership behaviours and setting the expectation, painting the vision will be critical, because you need that to get people to actually be interested in returning to the physical place, and do it with purpose. So I think one of the things that I think is wonderful is the culture change that's happened because of COVID, is that I think colleague expectations have really changed. It's been a completely seismic shift, and so people will need, I think, a really good reason, a good motivation to return to workplaces. So I think the leadership, it's always the case, isn't it, in every business question, every business challenge it's about leadership. So I think that was where I would start, is being clear to paint a really compelling vision about what it is you're trying to achieve post-pandemic. And then, as ever, if we accept that we will always have hybrid, and there will always be some people working from home, working remotely, working flexibly, and some people in a physical office environment, it's back to trying to invest in the digital solution so that it is a level playing field and it's a decent experience for everyone. And that's hard. I mean, on this call, we're seeing it, aren't we? Nicola's at home and it all's gone smoothly, but now we can't see Nicola. So there's something about how do you kind of get that sufficient digital investment to make sure that it can be an effective way of working.
Probably an advantage not to see me, to be honest.
Nicola, can I just come to you on that, please? Because there's a lot of debate around whether remote working or hybrid working or in office, is hybrid here to stay, or is hybrid not to stay? Is it just another passing phase from the space we were in April 2020, where everybody was at home, consigned to home? We've now migrated to the hybrid environment. Is it in a few years' time that actually hybrid will disappear and we'll all end up back in the office again?
No, I mean, I don't think hybrid is going to disappear. I've always said I don't think the future of work is permanently in an office or permanently at home. And you do have to factor in the in-betweeny bits as well, which I think are actually, my diary is starting to get hybrid now, and it's quite interesting around, okay, so if I've got to do a video call on the move and I'm not in an office and I'm not at home, what do I do? And we were having a really interesting discussion the other day as to whether phone boxes would come back, because somewhere where you've got a private space pretty good lighting, a place you can kind of put your technology on. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. We have actually seen quite a lot of phone boxes being deployed within offices as well as private spaces. So maybe the phone box is going to resurge as a place where we go to have private conversations. Who knows? I mean, I think a lot of this is going to, I think the conversation should be less about place and more about the work. And I think that would be a healthy conversation. I would like us in 5 years' time to not refer to work as flexible or hybrid or smart and just say it's work. Because I think that's what we really need to focus down on, is how do we make the work better? How do we make the work productive? How do we make it's a healthier way of working in terms of our employees? So yeah, and of course, as I said, with the climate challenge, what we don't want to encourage is pointless commuting. The days of me flying to Hong Kong for a half-hour meeting, which I did do once, and I don't advise anyone doing it ever again. I certainly won't, because we can do an awful lot through the technology that we haven't been able to do before. And I think people have been educated as to some of the advantages of the technology, as well as obviously, if your video camera goes wrong mid conference, there's not an awful lot you can do, but at least you can still hear me, and voice is an incredibly good common ground, actually. When we can't see each other, we can still collaborate very well using voice.
Let me ask the $6 question. Sorry, Sue, carry on.
Oh, no, I was rudely chipping in, but just to say, in our Better Workplace buildings, we are installing phone booths for people to go and quiet, like, I think, call them like the scream cell, because you can go in and scream and nobody can hear you. But we're using phone booths in office for people to just go and have quiet time. So there you go.
And we've got street hubs as well, haven't we? So we've got hubs on the street that, if you're commuting, you can just pop in a hub instead of a phone box. Cool. and do a conference call. And I think the other thing as well, Paul, is almost what we're doing with the Better Workplace programme is kind of similar at a top level to what the First Minister is trying to do with, smart working hubs, and gathering all sorts of organisations and public sector together in certain places across Wales. It's a similar sort of theme, really, albeit we're doing it within BT. The First Minister and the working community hubs is a similar kind of principle.
Yeah, absolutely. So we did a bit of work. I know that Caroline Lewis from Amy is on this call. We did a bit of work for Amy some time ago in respect of what is it that people actually want to do. And it's, they didn't always want to come back to the office. They wanted to be with people. And in that local working hub, the POFIS, as Nicola has referred to it, or the COFIS, seems to be very high on people's list, and I suspect that's probably still there. But it does play to an interesting point, which is, for the larger companies, this is a question that's come in. For larger companies, is it fewer larger central offices or more smaller offices better distributed across the country? I mean, what's from a BT perspective, what's the lead on that?
Shall I answer that, Paul? And obviously others can come in. But yeah, we spent a lot of time debating this. I can still remember sitting with a map of the whole of the UK going, are we dispersed? Are we hubs? And we went to the very radical in the thinking end of the 2 massive campuses for BT, that's it, versus 50 fabulous hubs all across the UK. And some of that is we've left ourselves sufficient space to still consider some of that. But we have concluded that for us, 5 or 6 big hubs in the UK, in every country in the UK, making sure we've got a good spread was the right place to start. But also to have, obviously, we have a big contact centre network and a big service centre network and operational centres. So a good distribution of decent sized buildings, with our intention is that ideally every colleague would be able to get to one of those, so that they can go in there and collaborate with colleagues if they wanted to. It's a bit of a difficult one for BT because, as you've said, Paul, we are huge, and our what we call our desk-based population of colleagues is over 50,000. So trying to make sure you find the right distribution for them is tricksy. But it's an ongoing debate, certainly, about the kind of, as Nicola said, the 15-minute city versus, the bigger cities that you can commute into. But for us, certainly, we are intending to have sufficient spread of really great offices that everyone can get to.
Great. Okay, let me move on to talk a bit about people. And Nicola, if I can come to you as the psychologist. The whole issue around how people are managed going forward is a major challenge. You know, we've brought up a traditional theme of management, which is people are in work, you can control them easily, you can visibly see them at work, etc. Now we're talking about moving that whole philosophy from control to trust. How, you know, what's your advice to people? How do people actually achieve that?
Well, I always say, firstly, don't assume that because people are in an office, they're actually doing any meaningful work. I think I've often challenged leaders in the past saying, well, look at that person, what do they do? And they probably don't know, but they assume because they can see them that they're actually doing work. And I think that's quite an interesting debate, actually, around, well, absolutely, it's trust. I mean, that's the key one. And Linda Grattan, who's done some incredible work around leadership in remote organizations, has always said you need to trust by default. So rather than earning trust, it's kind of, well, prove that you're not trustworthy. And that's why, I mean, some of the issues that have come out during the pandemic, there was quite a big trend at one point, and still probably is, particularly in the US, for surveillance software, because they patently didn't trust people. But the surveillance software largely is around using the camera, sampling the camera to see who's sitting at the laptop, monitoring keystrokes. Again, is that really productivity? So I think, you know, we need to learn, in terms of leaders, it's very much around less about the input, more about the output, really defining purpose, telling those stories, making sure people understand where they fit, where their future role is, that sort of future focus as well. So what am I doing now? What am I doing in the future? How do I fit? Certainly the psychological contract as well, you know, I'm safe to speak up. All of that stuff I think needs to be there in a remote organization, as well as it does in any organization. To be honest, a lot of this is just good leadership. You just strip it back. But I think in terms of that out of sight, out of mind thing, having run remote teams before, I think the one thing you do need to be really cognizant of is that you can't just have a quick huddle meeting when people aren't all in the same place. You have to open that meeting up to everybody. And even things like, you know, significant discussions in an office need to be replicated in the written space so that everyone can see those significant conversations. So I think it is really about that being cognizant about proximity bias and not rewarding people simply because you see them. You reward people because you understand what they do and you understand their contribution.
Okay, time's ticking on, but I've been preempted by a question from the audience here, and I think it's an interesting one. And Nick Speed, you may wish to have a view on this as well, which is, you know, this is a seismic change in the way we work. It's a seismic change in the way we live our lives. Is this something that should be a policy piece from a government perspective? And I know that, you know, those of us in Wales, from a Welsh government perspective, they have this request in place which says we should spend 30% of our time working from home. Or is it something that industry should drive from the bottom up? What's BT's view?
I'm happy to say a few words on that. I think, you know, listening to the conversation today, what's really clear is that some businesses, and some small businesses in particular, are going to need some support to make the most of the opportunities that are available from the new ways of working. I mean, there's a question in the chat bar about what happens in areas where there isn't the sufficient connectivity. I think it's really good to see that, you know, that those areas are becoming few and far between. And BT is investing £15 billion to get broadband to 25 million properties over the next 5 years. So fewer and fewer of those properties, you know, this is going to be a problem. But, you know, those properties obviously include businesses as well. And, you know, businesses, you know, want to be able to know that they're skilled as well as connected, and that their workforces are trained to make the ways that you make the most of all the interesting things that we've heard about this morning about how you can stay connected to your teams and your customers.
Okay, So there's a combination of two, isn't it, there, which is interesting. Let's just talk about, in the last minute or so, let's just talk about the process, because there's concern always around connectivity. There's control around how do people convert to the next level of technology. There's lots of software around. It's a very confusing space. How do SMEs go about making that choice? Maybe Sam, you've got some view on that.
Oh, that's a difficult question. It comes down to what's fit for you and what's right for your business, Paul. There is no blanket answer that that I can give, to be honest. We use lots of different tools in BT. I'm sure our customers and SMEs do as well. It's based on what they're trying to achieve and what they can afford, to be fair.
Yeah, and it's difficult, isn't it? And I think what we have done is we've adopted a level of flexibility, haven't we, in respect of if the camera's not working or if somebody drops out, then that's acceptable. It was frowned on before, but now it's completely acceptable that the dog barks.
I think generally the base infrastructure is getting there, and there is a lot of choice out there in the marketplace. So it's about what's right fit for your business, really.
Okay, look, wonderful. Thank you. We're just over time. It's been an absolutely fascinating insight into what BT are committing to in respect of providing resources and support for businesses as we move into this very different working environment. My thanks to Sam Toombs, to Sue, and to Nicola in Ipswich. Although we can't see you, we've certainly heard you this morning. There are some questions outstanding, which we will certainly get to answer directly to you. Thank you as participants for taking part this morning, and where possible we will be able to share Nicola's presentation. I know there have been some requests from that, and I see that the answer has been is yes, so we will try and share Nicola's presentation with you as well. So thank you all indeed, and we look forward to seeing you all again very soon. Thanks now.